Even though a trade up for Miami's Cam Ward might have too steep a price tag for the New Orleans Saints, I wouldn't rule out a trade up for a different quarterback if the opportunity presents itself. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at ESPN's Matt Miller's 7-round mock draft to close out the show. I'll tell you one of the selections that he made that I absolutely abhor. We'll also take a look at the Saints visiting a pair of quarterbacks, spending more time with more quarterbacks this offseason. And speaking of quarterbacks, even though a trade up for Cam Ward might be too steep a price tag for the New Orleans Saints, a quarterback trade-up should not be out of the question for New Orleans in the first round. We got all that and more for you on today's episode. We appreciate you, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time and making us your first listen, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets by just winning your first $5 bet. You can get started today at FanDuel.com. The price tag for Cam Ward to move up with the Tennessee Titans at number 1 overall, because that's what you're going to have to do if you want to select him. The Miami quarterback is very, very, very expensive. It sounds like the conversations are beginning at 3 first-round picks, which should be too steep a price tag for the New Orleans Saints as is. And I've seen, different trade proposals tossed about and stuff like that include, several first round picks, a couple of other picks, quarterback Derek Carr, who you really can't trade until June 2nd anyway, because if you trade him before June 1st, all of that upcoming guarantees and all that stuff kind of accelerates to this year. You take on like $59 million of dead cap. That ends up putting you over the salary cap, which you can't be at this point. Just financially, I don't believe that it's workable for salary cap purposes. So if you're going to trade Derek Carr, that's got to be post June 1. But I also don't think that if you land either, Cam Ward or another quarterback in this draft, that you necessarily need to trade Derek Carr, because you'd like to give that quarterback a year to get comfortable in your system, get comfortable with Kellen Moore, get comfortable with the players around them, and then be able to take that step up, even if it's a half a year, just to give them an opportunity to acclimate to the NFL before they have to go out there and be the face of a franchise. But if the Saints are going to do that, I wouldn't expect Cam Ward to be the player. 3 first-round picks is just a little steep. And remember, you're not just trading 3 first-round picks, right? Because there's also the Browns, who are sitting there at number 2, who love Cam Ward and who really like Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado as well, but they really love Miami's Cam Ward. And so if they find out that the Titans are trying to trade and move around and everything like that, and the Titans would be right to call up the Browns and say, hey, teams are trying to move up. We're thinking about trading out of 1. What do you got? I mean, the Titans moving back 1 spot and still landing Shedeur Sanders or Abdul Carter, you'll take that if you're the Tennessee Titans, and you'll probably end up taking less draft capital from them because their draft capital is better. And so the Saints offer of 9 and then 2 more first round picks is not going to be enough to beat the Cleveland Browns offer of 2 and a couple more first round picks. And so you're going to have to throw in even more draft capital on top of that. And the whole idea for the New Orleans Saints this offseason was to get younger, was to use their draft picks, was to try to, walk away with several different, top end players in this year's draft. You hamper your ability to do that by going up and making a move like this. The thing we also have to remember is that the Saints would be charged a premium, because if Tennessee's moving from 1 to 9, not only are they trading out of Cam Ward, but they're trading out of Travis Hunter, they're trading out of Shedeur Sanders, and they're trading out of Abdul Carter. They're probably trading out of one of the top offensive linemen, and they're trading out of some other top defender, Mason Graham or something like that. And so you're asking Tennessee to not just give up the quarterback, Cam Ward, you're asking them to give up 2 quarterbacks and 6 other players in total? So your asking price is going to skyrocket, or their asking price is going to skyrocket because of what you're asking them to do. So the price tag just gets steeper and steeper and steeper if you're the New Orleans Saints. And then once the Browns with the number 2 overall selection into the conversation, or the Giants with the number 3 overall pick into the conversation, then all of a sudden your offer is nothing. You know what I mean? And so it's going to be very, very tough for the Saints to be able to compete with that. And it's going to be very, very tough asking the Tennessee Titans to trade out of 8 different players to give you the opportunity to go up there and grab, Cam Ward. You're going to have to pay a lot more than just those 3 first-round picks. You're going to have to pay a ton in order to be able to get up there. Now, I will say that even though a trade up for Cam Ward doesn't make a lot of sense for New Orleans, a trade up for a quarterback could in the first round. Let's say that the Cleveland Browns, who are picking at number 2, decide that they want to go with Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State. Now, there's some scary things around Abdul Carter right now, health-wise, because he didn't participate in the combine. Everyone said he was going to light up his pro day. Then on the day of his pro day, he ends up not participating in his pro day and all of his pro day stuff and everything. And so I think that there's concerns there in terms of like, okay, how bad is this foot? How bad is this shoulder? What's going on? Are you just waiting to get some kind of like guaranteed contract before saying, hey, I got to get surgery? You know what I mean? And so these off-season medical checks are going to be super important. But I think if you find that the medical checks are fine, which is possible, then I could see the Cleveland Browns prioritizing a guy like Abdul Carter and then maybe trying to trade for Kirk Cousins or trying to get Aaron Rodgers to change his mind about Pittsburgh or bust and maybe try to get him to Cleveland or something like that. I don't know. But you find out something else that you can do at quarterback. And then the Giants could potentially pass. They've signed both Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. I still don't think that they do if Shedeur Sanders falls to 3. But let's say that they do. Then all of a sudden, if he makes it to picks 4 or 5, if I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm making those phone calls because I'm trying to get ahead of the Las Vegas Raiders and the New York Giants, right? And so at 4, you got the New England Patriots. They're set at quarterback. At number 5, you've got the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're pretty set at quarterback when it comes to Trevor Lawrence. And so I'm trying to move up to one of those places if that's where Shedeur Sanders ends up going and ends up falling. I don't mind doing that. I'll trade up. I'll snag a Shedeur Sanders at 4 and then give him a year behind Derek Carr. I've got my new starter for the future. I don't have to give up as much move from 9 to 4, especially when the team like the New England Patriots doesn't need a quarterback. I don't know if the Raiders or the Jets see themselves as teams that need to move up for a quarterback if he starts to fall. They could just be teams that would be interested in that quarterback if he made it to their range. And so the Saints could be in good position to do that. You move up, you draft Shedeur Sanders, you give him a year behind Derek Carr, you have your new starter. If you want to, you can try to recoup some of the draft picks that you have to send to get up from 9 to 4, which isn't nearly as much as you'd have to trade to get from 9 to 1. You can try to recoup some of those draft picks by trading Derek Carr June 2. But I'm all about the idea of giving Shedeur Sanders a year to get comfortable in your system, get comfortable with Kellen Moore, get comfortable with the NFL, even half a year if that's what's necessary, whatever it might be. And then go down that road at a later point when it comes to Derek Carr because you have your new starter in the building. And so I think even though a trade up for Cam Ward doesn't make any sense for New Orleans, a trade up for a quarterback could happen if the opportunity is right. And speaking of, the New Orleans Saints continue their tour of visiting with quarterbacks and other players, but quarterbacks in particular continue to make the news cycle. And so the Saints visiting with 2 very interesting quarterbacks that were amongst the beginning of the draft process, 2 of the most popular quarterback names to be connected to New Orleans, Kyle McCord and Jaxson Dart. Let's break it down next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Here we are in the thick of March Madness, and FanDuel.com is where you're going to want to go to get in on the tournament action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That's $200 that you can then use on things like buzzer beaters, Cinderella stories, even who's going to be cutting down the net by the time that it's all said and done. We have some of the best women's basketball games going on this evening. South Carolina, 17.5-point favorites over Maryland. A good place to place your first $5 bet on that money line. The LSU women are 3.5-point favorites up against NC State. UCLA, 8.5-point favorites over Mississippi. A lot to get in on over at FanDuel.com today. By the way, FanDuel.com, that's where you're going to want to go to get in on all this college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints continue their busy offseason when it comes to the NFL draft, visits, private workouts, dinners, all that stuff. And they continue also to be connected to all these quarterbacks that are out here on this landscape. And tell you, at some point, the noise becomes so loud, you start not to believe it. But you have to wonder if where there's smoke, there's fire, as we often say in the NFL draft. But ultimately, we'll find out at a later time. But for now, the New Orleans Saints continue to do their due diligence. They've checked in on guys like Ward and Shedeur Sanders, who are at the top of the draft. They've spent time with other quarterbacks like Quinn Ewers. And then now, according to multiple reports or several reports, we've seen the New Orleans Saints connected to spending time with Kyle McCord over at Syracuse, as well as spending time with Jaxson Dart over at Ole Miss. And these two quarterbacks were kind of the first two quarterbacks that the Saints were most often connected to early on in the draft process. Jaxson Dart was the guy that was consistently referred to as being Jalen Hurts-esque or Jalen Hurts-ish, if you will. Kyle McCord being more of the traditional pocket passer, maybe fitting a little bit more of the ilk of, let's say, Dak Prescott after the lower leg injury, right? To where he became a little bit more of a pocket passer, wasn't as much of a scrambler, didn't work outside of structure as much, all those other things. And honestly, I think both of these quarterbacks are solid quarterbacks to take later round swings on. And all that I mean by later is like day 2, day 3. I don't mean later like round 6 and 7 or anything like that. I think these guys are probably off the board well before round 6 and 7. McCord maybe being the one to go after 4th or 5th round. And I could see Jaxson Dart going anywhere from round 1 to round 3, or round 1 to round 2 is probably more appropriate. Because if I'm the New Orleans Saints and Jaxson Dart's on the board at 40, I'm really considering it. Like, I'm really, really considering it. Like, if Kellen Moore likes Jaxson Dart. I think that's the thing we got to remember with these quarterbacks, right? Like, I might not be a big fan of this quarterback class. I might not be a big fan of certain quarterbacks in this class in terms of their style of play or, you know, what you see when you look at the advanced metrics in terms of what it actually says about these players, accuracy, inaccuracy, things like that. Like, everybody's got something you can ding them on. There's no doubt about that. That's the draft. But really what the draft is all about and what scouting is all about is what do these players do well, not what do they not do well. Because you're not going to go in and ask them, at least ideally, you're not going to go in and draft these players, bring them to your organization, and then try to make them do the thing that they don't do well. That's not what you're supposed to do anyway. I know we've seen examples of that, of course, but that's not what you're supposed to do. Ideally, you're drafting these guys, you're bringing them to New Orleans, and you're having them play to what it is that they do well. So you care more about what is it that you can do than what is it that you can't do, unless the thing that you can't do is a severe hindrance. A quarterback that can't throw a football, different conversation. But if you can't throw a football, you're probably not a quarterback anyway, or at least shouldn't have been. And so for guys like Jaxson Dart and Kyle McCord, it's easy to see what it is that they do well and how they could potentially, I guess, interest, right, or appeal to a head coach like Kellen Moore, who's worked with several different styles of quarterbacks, all of that. Jaxson Dart, somebody that works really well outside of structure, can play a little bit of that playground ball, move around a little bit. He can run. He's not going to be somebody that's going to be like the dynamic Lamar Jackson that's going to make a bunch of defenders miss and spin and twist and do all this stuff that ends up picking you up 58 yards on a big quarterback run or anything like that. But he's somebody that can move around, that can evade, that has good awareness within the pocket, that's able to get outside the pocket, throw on the run, all those other things, and can pick up some yards for you as well by using his legs when necessary. Meanwhile, Kyle McCord is like the exact opposite. He's a stand and deliver, quick pass, read and react type of quarterback. But when I say read and react, that's more of a defensive thing. But really, like reading and react, what I mean is like being able to look a safety off and then be able to, deliver where that safety just vacated, things like that. Like he's a really good traditional pocket passer of the style of guys like Sam Darnold and Kirk Cousins and stuff like that. I don't want to use the best names or the best pocket passes out there because then it sounds like I'm comparing them to legends, but I'm not trying to do that. So I'm picking other types of quarterbacks. And so I would look at Jaxson Dart as somebody that could make sense for Kellen Moore. If Kellen Moore really likes him, I would see Kyle McCord as somebody that could make sense based on his size, based on what it is that he could potentially be under Kellen Moore as well. Both of these guys, much like Will Howard, much like Quinn Ewers, who they've also viewed, have things that play to their advantage that a guy like Kellen Moore could indeed build off of and would have time to develop and all these other things. The question mark, though, is, are either of these guys decidedly better prospects or have decidedly better potential than Spencer Rattler? It's not a question that I'm really ready to answer because I haven't seen those guys play NFL football or anything like that. But for the people that have to project that, that's a task. And that's a tough question that they would have to answer. Now, the thing to remember is that none of the draft picks that have been made before this upcoming draft were selected by this coaching staff. Therefore, there are no loyalties on this coaching staff for previous draft picks. We said the same thing about Jake Haener when Jake Haener was kind of that, that Pete Carmichael, Derek Carr, Dennis Allen type of selection. But then once Clint Kubiak came in, and then Clint Kubiak was a part of the staff when they selected Spencer Rattler, it was like, okay, well, that means something, right? And so if this coaching staff goes into this draft and selects a different quarterback, knowing that you've got Jake Haener on the roster, knowing that you've got Spencer Rattler on the roster, knowing that you've got Derek Carr on the roster, depending upon where that selection is made, it tells you something. It says something, right? Like we have to be fair here. We have to treat all of this the same. And so the Saints would have to make that decision. Are guys like Jaxson Dart, Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, they offer better development, better potential, and a higher ceiling than what you already have in the building. And if they don't, then move on and draft guys that will impact the people that you already have in the building that will make the team better. This is the Saints' best chance, this draft, to get better. I would say that so far they've come out kind of even when it comes to the roster, right? They improved at safety, but they downgraded a little bit at corner. They might have improved at the offensive line. We don't know. Lucas Patrick out, Dylan Radins in. And Dylan Radins was great in his introductory press conference, by the way. He'll get an opportunity now to be able to hopefully settle into one specific spot, just like he did last year in Tennessee, left guard in New Orleans, right guard in Tennessee. And he talked about the wonders that did for him in terms of building continuity, building confidence, all those other things. But outside of that, like they didn't get better at wide receiver necessarily. They didn't get better at tight end. In fact, they have the exact same tight end room, right? So the getting better part comes from being healthy and the players, the execution being better and then the coaching being better. I think you inherently got better because of your coaching. I want to give the New Orleans Saints credit where credit is due there. But this draft is really the best place that you can go now to improve your roster. And so if you don't want to utilize one of those picks on a quarterback that might never see the football field for you, or a developmental quarterback, or however it is that you want to look at it, I don't think that's an unwise situation. Go for the thing that feels most sure. And if they feel really good about Jaxson Dart, then go for it. But if you're not sure, go and get the guy that you're sure about that's going to make your team better right now, because that is what you have the opportunity to do in a draft where you have 9 selections, several starter opportunities in terms of the players, in terms of the talent in the draft pool, and 5 of those, what is it? 5? No, 6 of those 9 selections in the top 150 of this year's draft. That's prime real estate to make your team better. So don't make any guesses here. You roll with what you're sure about, or what you're most sure about. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints were given 7 rounds of mock by Matt Miller over at ESPN. Some of these selections really solid, but one of them I absolutely hate. Let's dive into it as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's Get it, Who Dat Nation? The New Orleans Saints were given 9 selections, 7 rounds by ESPN's Matt Miller. And honestly, I think the draft is really solid. There's one pick, though, that kind of stands out to me as one that I would kind of push the pause button on, however. But I wanted to run through this because I thought, we've done a lot of mock drafts here every Monday, and we'll do another one next Monday and everything. But it's good every now and then to get another perspective in. So this is Matt Miller's 7-round mock for the New Orleans Saints. Beginning at round, and we'll just go round by round and break each one down here. Round 1, pick 9, defensive back, Jahdae Barron out of Texas. Love that selection. Absolutely love that selection. I'm actually going to move a little bit faster here because I want to get to the next selection because I told you there was a pick that I hate, and I want to go to the pick that I hate. Then I'll tell you why I love the Jahdae Barron selection. Round 2, pick 40, quarterback Quinn Ewers out of Texas. Now, listen, he has not struck me as a guy that is set to go this early in this draft. At round 2, pick 40, there's a chance that you've got a guy like Jaxson Dart still on the board, or a Jalen Milroe still on the board, or you can wait a little while and you can roll the dice on a guy like Kyle McCord or Will Howard. I'd much rather those probably than a guy like Quinn Ewers, who, look, in his first year in the SEC, led the SEC in touchdowns with 31, but also led the SEC in interceptions with 12. His completion percentage came down. His yardage came down only by 7 yards. So I'm nitpicking there for sure. But it's just, you want to see a guy get better every year. At best, he was the same in 2024. Now, he entered SEC play, and so maybe that was a big part of that, whatever that might be. But this just doesn't feel like the way to spend a 2025 second round pick and prime real estate in the second round. I'd much rather see the New Orleans Saints use that 40th overall selection for an edge rusher in the situation, right? Like, you get Jahdae Barron in the first round, turn around and grab an edge rusher in the second round, or an offensive lineman in the second round, something like that's going to be able to help you pretty immediately, as opposed to a Quinn Ewers who might never see an NFL football field for you. So I would not go that route. I don't dislike Quinn Ewers. I dislike Quinn Ewers at pick 40 in the second round. That's the thing that gives me kind of the hold up there. So going back to the round 1 selection of Jahdae Barron, Jahdae Barron has become one of my favorite draft prospects in this class. High quality guy in terms of character, high quality guy in terms of leadership, 5 interceptions last year. So he showed you some of the ball hawking ability that he had to go along with the 11 passes defended that he had as well. All-American last season, combined 67 tackles, has the ability to play either corner spot, can play on the inside for you, can play safety. The Saints have one of their biggest remaining needs now is still the starting outside corner. I like the pickup of Isaac Yiadom. And I think Isaac Yiadom can start for you on the outside. But this is a team that has never been shy about the fact that they want 4 starting corners. And right now they have 3 and a potential 4th, because I give Rico Payton a lot of credit. Rico Payton is actually a lot better than I think that people think he is, or people have gotten the opportunity to realize he is. Let me say it that way, because he hasn't gotten a lot of opportunity. He's been mostly playing as a punt gunner, and he's done that incredibly well. But this is a team that wants 4 bona fide starters at corner. And so you have Kool-Aid McKinstry, you have Isaac Yiadom, you have Alontae Taylor, and I just ordered them that way because I think the first 2 are on the outside and then Alontae Taylor's in the slot. You add a guy like Jahdae Barron, and all of a sudden, like, you unlock a lot of opportunity there. Maybe Jahdae Barron and Kool-Aid McKinstry become your starters on the outside, and then Yiadom ends up being quality depth for you because he's going to get snaps, right? Somebody's going to miss a game. Somebody's going to miss some snaps, whatever it might be. And then eventually, Tyrann Mathieu and his time with the New Orleans Saints will come to an end. And then could Jahdae Barron end up moving to safety? And then you have some kind of pairing like Jahdae Barron and Justin Reid at safety. I think that this is just one of those selections that, with a little bit of foresight, goes a really, really long way. So I really, really like Jahdae Barron a ton. In round 3, I'll give you both selections. Wide receiver Jalen Royals out of Utah State. Edge rusher JT Tuimoloau, I want to make sure I pronounce it right, Tuimoloau, out of Ohio State. So you got your Ohio State guy, you got your Buckeye in this draft. Very good. But I like the Jalen Royals selection a lot too, because I think Jalen Royals, even though he comes in at like 6'1", plays a lot bigger than he is. And I think would be an excellent complement to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and Brandon Cooks. And Jalen Royals gives you yards after catch ability as well. Great with the ball in his hands. That's something that the Saints don't really have on their roster right now. And so that's something I'd love to see them add. Jalen Royals would be a solid in between of a guy that plays bigger than he is and the big yards after catch threat for sure. But the wide receiver is not done in this draft either. Tuimoloau is somebody that's really interesting too. Can play anywhere from like stand up 4 to wide 9. You can move him around, especially in this 3-4 set. I think he would be a really good addition. And especially falling all the way to the third round like this, like that's an absolute steal if you can get to Imoloao this late in the draft. The New Orleans Saints edge rusher, I think that that's another position where they could go. According to Nick Underhill, the Saints did have, I believe it was dinner with James Pierce Jr. It was either dinner or private workouts. I apologize, I can't remember, but spent some time with James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher out of Tennessee, along with his teammate safety there. But I think him in the first round or an edge rusher in the top 3 rounds, excellent move by New Orleans, even with the retention of Chase Young and all that. I still think you can continue to add to that position. Let's go to the 4th round here at pick 112, Wyatt Milam out of West Virginia. Again, big fall here. And then at pick 132 or 131, running back Jordan James out of Oregon. I think Jordan James is really good. I really like him as a rusher. I like his style of play. Can run in between the tackles, can get physical, but has good speed as well. He's got to, clean up the vision stuff a little bit. But it's one of the reasons why you're drafting him in the 4th round. But there's so many starting running backs potential. Let me say it this way. There's so many draftable running backs that could be starters in this year's NFL draft class that if the New Orleans Saints don't leave without a running back in this draft class, they've made a mistake somewhere. Something didn't go the way it was supposed to go. And so they have to have another plan at running back. Maybe they're calling up J.K. Dobbins after the draft or something like that. But man, getting a Jordan James this late would be awesome. Getting a Wyatt Milam this late would be awesome too. Somebody that has that tackle guard versatility would immediately come in and compete for that starting left guard spot, I would imagine. And if nothing else, gives you super quality depth because you need 8 offensive linemen in today's NFL. You need your 5 starters and you need 3 depth players that you can really, really rely upon. He would add to one of those 2 numbers without a doubt. Let's wrap this up. Round 6, Elijah Roberts, the defensive lineman out of SMU. At pick 248 in the 7th round, wide receiver Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas. And then at pick 254 to wrap it all up, center Jared Bayer out of Arkansas State. So there you got a guy in Wyatt Milam who can help you out on the outside, and on the inside you get a guy like Jacob Bayer who can help you out on the inside wherever, right? Center or at guard. I think the Saints continuing to invest in the center position makes a lot of sense. One of the things that Dylan Radin said was that he's actually quite comfortable at center too if he needed to be, but he just hasn't been asked to do that. And so basically like the Saints would be pretty set there. So I do like that addition. But Roberts and Armstrong are big standouts to me. Elijah Roberts out of SMU, is in that tweener category of like 6'4", 6'5", 280 pounds, 290 pounds, probably more around 280, 275. But he is somebody that can play defensive tackle and move outside. He's kind of Tano Passanio, who the Saints did not bring back this offseason. So he kind of tracks, right? In terms of the ability to be able to bring in a guy that can do that same thing and that can give you what it is that you're looking for in terms of versatility on the defensive line. And then finally, SEC leading receiver, by the way, Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas. Only 1 receiving touchdown in 2024, which was really interesting because he had 78 receptions for 1,140 yards and really, really performed well when it came to workouts and all those other things. This is kind of one of those guys that's being looked at as a potential late round steal, along with like Elijah Badger and some of these other players out there that could come in and end up being a quality player for you, but drafted late in day 3. Hit his measurements, 6'3", 202 pounds, 37.5 vertical leap, 4.5 40. Was excellent all across all that. It ranks around like a 9.44 when it comes to RAS. So solid selections here by Matt Miller. The only thing I didn't like was the quarterback pick at 240. I think I'm okay without that one. But outside of that, really, really solid stuff there. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, more on Dylan Radin's media availability and more on even more visits, conversations, dinners with draft prospects. We got that all coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much. As always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. They're not a family's doing them. How you living? Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.